Welcome back, everyone. Today's deep dive is all about how practical wisdom can really help new managers. Those folks stepping into leadership for the first time. We're going to be talking about this interesting concept called phronesis.
Oh yeah, phronesis. It's a Greek term, basically means practical wisdom, but it's not just about knowing what to do in theory.
Right. It's got to be more than just book smarts.
Totally. It's about making good judgments, taking action, but in real life situations where things are messy, no easy answers.
So, you can read all the management books,
Right.
but then actually leading a team, that's different. That takes a different kind of wisdom.
That's the thing about phronesis. Think about it. You go from maybe doing your own work to suddenly being responsible for this whole group. Each person's got their own, strengths, weaknesses, even their quirks.
Yeah, and how do you navigate all of that? There's no one right answer for everything, is there?
Exactly. Every challenge is going to be unique. That's what makes phronesis so important for new managers.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But how does this practical wisdom thing actually play out when a new manager has to make those real decisions every day?
Let's take decision making as an example. Imagine you've got this choice to make. Could impact your team, your project, even the whole company. These choices, they're rarely clear-cut.
Right, there's so many factors to consider.
You've got to balance different people's views, think about what might happen, and often you just got to make a judgment call even if you don't have all the info.
Sounds a lot like what you were describing earlier. Phronesis, applying what you know, what you've learned, to make the best call in that specific situation.
You got it. No magic formula for good leadership.
Yeah.
It's more about having that mindset where you can make those tough calls, thinking about not just what happens right now, but the long term too, for your team, for the organization.
So it's also like phronesis is something you build over time, right?
Hmm.
The more challenges you face, the more you learn from those experiences.
Absolutely. Like a muscle you got to exercise. It's interesting. Think back to your own life, like a big decision you had to make. Choosing a college, a job, even moving to a new city.
Man, deciding on college, that was stressful. So many unknowns, felt like a huge decision.
Exactly. You probably weighed all sorts of factors, talked to people, did research, and in the end, made the best choice you could with the information you had.
And even though it was scary, all those unknowns, there was also that excitement, like a new chapter starting.
And that's a lot like becoming a manager. It is a leap into the unknown with both challenges and opportunities. That's where phronesis becomes your guide.
Okay, so if we want to start using this phronesis and those day-to-day challenges of being a new manager, how do we actually do that?
Well, one of the biggest areas that comes into play is decision making, right? Every day, you're making choices that impact your team, your project, the company. And these decisions, they're not always black and white. You've got to balance priorities, think long term, and about what your team needs right now.
It's like this constant juggling act. And I bet it gets even more complex when you add in things like the company culture, each person's personality, and just how fast things change in whatever industry you're in.
You hit the nail on the head. And this is where we see a really cool connection to something like Amazon's two pizza teams. These teams, they're kept small, they're independent, so they can make their own decisions.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
The idea is if you can't feed the whole team with two pizzas, it's probably too big to be really effective and flexible.
Right. But think about it. This idea of letting teams decide things for themselves, it actually reflects some deeper ideas about freedom and responsibility.
Wait, are we getting philosophical in the workplace now? Didn't see that coming.
Might sound surprising, but there's a real link there. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialism guy, he talked about how freedom always comes with responsibility.
Okay, now I see how that fits with those two pizza teams. You're giving them the freedom to make choices, but they're also the ones who have to answer for the results.
Exactly. A perfect example of phronesis in action. It's finding that balance, giving teams enough room to be creative, but also making sure they're on track with the company's goals.
This makes me think about self-awareness too. If you as the manager don't realize your own tendencies, like if you micromanage or if you're not great at giving directions, you might make decisions that seem good in theory, but just totally backfire when you try to put them into practice.
That is such a good point. Phronesis requires knowing yourself, your strengths and weaknesses as a leader. Let's say you're someone who likes to be hands-on, involved in every detail. That might have been great when you were just doing your own work, but now, as a manager, it could overwhelm your team if you don't change your approach a bit.
So you're saying moving into that management role, you kind of got to do some soul searching, right?
Yeah.
You got to be aware of how your own style is going to impact the team. Could be good or bad.
Exactly. It's not about forcing your way on others. It's about understanding how your team works, each person's different, and then adjusting how you lead to bring out the best in them.
So self-awareness is key. But how does a new manager actually start building that phronesis in their everyday work? What are the practical steps?
That's the million-dollar question. And it brings us to some really concrete actions. First, we got to talk about making that leap. Going from all the stuff you've learned to actually leading a real team.
That jump from theory to practice, I can see how that would be tough, especially if you're feeling kind of overwhelmed by it all.
Yeah, it's a big leap. Almost like you've been learning this whole leadership language, but only in theory. Now you got to actually speak it, like, fluently.
I get it. Spending all that time with case studies, classes, then boom, you're in the thick of it. Real people, real deadlines, real consequences, no more hypothetical stuff.
Exactly. And that's when phronesis really kicks in. It's that bridge, between knowing what to do and actually doing it, taking all that knowledge and applying it in a situation that's always changing.
Okay, let's get specific then. How does a new manager start to develop that phronesis muscle? What are the practical steps?
The first step, it's so simple, people miss it all the time. You got to really get to know your team.
Not just names and what their job title is.
Nope, it's deeper than that. Their strengths, weaknesses, how they like to work, what motivates them, all of it.
Recognizing that it's not just a team, it's individuals, right? Each
Mhm.
person brings something different to the table.
Exactly. One size fits all leadership, that just doesn't work. A frenetic leader gets that.
This reminds me of what you said before about phronesis being like a muscle. The more you understand each person on your team, the better decisions you can make to help them grow.
I like that connection. It's about seeing them as people, not just workers. Each person has their own goals, their own potential. When you tap into that, they're not just more productive, but they feel like they belong, like their work has meaning.
So it's not just about hitting targets, it's about actually caring about the people on your team.
It's both. The most successful teams, the individuals feel valued, respected, they feel like their work matters. And that starts with the leader taking the time to understand and appreciate each one of them.
How does a new manager actually do that? Casual chats, formal evaluations, something else entirely.
It's all of the above. It starts with those little things, chatting about their weekend, remembering their birthday, asking about their family, just those human moments.
Those moments that show, hey, we're people first, colleagues second.
Exactly. But then you got to be intentional too. When you're interacting with your team, ask open-ended questions, encourage them to share ideas, and really listen to what they say.
So is good listening a part of this whole phronesis thing?
Huge part. Active listening, it's crucial. Builds trust, gets people working together, and you start to understand the team dynamics so much better. It's not just about hearing the words, it's being present, noticing their body language too.
Like you're tuning into a different frequency. You hear what they're saying out loud, but also what they might be hesitant to say or what their body language is telling you.
Exactly. Think about a time when you felt like someone really listened to you.
Once I was struggling with this project and my manager, she just sat with me. Didn't try to fix it, just listened to me vent. It was amazing how much better I felt just having her acknowledge it.
That's the power of listening right there. Shows you care, that it's not just about what they produce, but about them as people.
And that connection, that feeling of being valued,
Yeah.
that's got to be incredibly motivating.
Oh, absolutely. It creates loyalty, makes people want to go the extra mile because they know their leader has their back. Now imagine you're a new manager, you want to prove yourself, establish your authority, all that.
Oh yeah, the imposter syndrome we talked about earlier.
Yeah,
You feel like you need to have all the answers all the time.
right. But here's the thing, the best leaders, they're not afraid to say, I don't know. Actually, admitting that is a sign of strength. Shows you're willing to learn, you value what other people know, and you're not afraid to show a little vulnerability.
So you're saying create a culture where it's okay to ask questions, even admit mistakes, and ask for help when you need it.
Exactly. And that brings us to another part of phronesis. Humility. Knowing that you don't have all the answers, that you're always learning. And to be successful, you need to tap into the wisdom of your whole team.
That's so different from how we usually think of leaders, right? The know-it-all in charge of everything. Phronesis is more about working together, learning from each other, and recognizing everyone's strengths.
You got it. It's a whole different way of thinking about leadership. Not top-down, but more collaborative. Everyone's involved. And guess what? This connects back to those two pizza teams.
Those smaller, independent teams.
Yeah.
You're saying that structure actually encourages this whole frenetic approach.
Exactly. When you give teams the freedom to make their own choices, you create an environment where everyone wants to contribute. Ideas get tossed around, people learn together. It's pretty cool to see.
Like a mini society within the team. Each person making choices but working towards the same goal.
I like that. A mini society where phronesis can really thrive. It's easier to communicate, give feedback, and everyone feels responsible for the outcome.
So it's not just about how the team is structured, it's about the culture within that structure. A culture where this whole idea of phronesis is valued, where people actually practice it.
You nailed it. You want people to feel comfortable sharing ideas, admitting when they mess up, and asking for help. Learning becomes something you do all the time, not just a one-time thing.
This brings up another challenge new managers face. Communication, especially when you're trying to figure out your leadership style and build trust with a new team. How does phronesis help with all of that?
Great question. Because communication, it's not just about passing on information, it's also about connecting with people, building relationships, getting them excited to take action.
More than just emails and meetings, right? It's about choosing the right words, the right tone, the right way to approach each situation.
Exactly. And that's where phronesis comes in. It helps you realize there's no one right way to communicate. Just like you adjust how you lead to each person on your team, you got to adjust how you communicate depending on what you're saying and who you're saying it to.
Being adaptable, paying attention to those little nuances in each conversation, and basically choosing the words and tone that are going to work best.
You got it. Think about a time when you got feedback from a boss or a mentor. What made that feedback really stick with you? Was it just blunt or was it delivered with care? You know, the way they phrased it made a difference.
I had this mentor once who pointed out something I was doing wrong with how I communicated. He didn't directly criticize me, though. He told me a story about a similar experience he had and how he learned to handle those situations differently.
There you go. Phronesis in action. He didn't just tell you the information. He chose the right way to say it, the right story, the right tone, so you'd actually get it and be able to do something about it.
And because of that, I was much more open to hearing it. Felt like guidance, not criticism.
Bingo. That's what frenetic communication is all about. You use your judgment, your experience, to choose the words, the tone that will connect with the other person, build trust, and help them improve.
This makes me think about another communication hurdle, dealing with conflict. How does phronesis help us navigate that, especially as new managers?
Another area where phronesis can really make a difference, because let's face it, conflict happens, especially when you've got a team with lots of different people, different opinions, different ways of working.
I think a lot of new managers are terrified of conflict, like avoid it at all costs.
It makes sense. Conflict can be uncomfortable, stressful. Sometimes it leads to bad feelings and relationships getting messed up.
But we got to remember, conflict isn't always a bad thing. If it's handled well, it can spark creativity and lead to new ideas.
Exactly. And phronesis can help us see conflict in a new light. It's not about pretending disagreements don't exist or trying to shut them down. It's about understanding that different viewpoints can actually be good if we approach them with curiosity and a willingness to find solutions that work for everyone.
So instead of seeing conflict as a threat, you see it as a chance to learn and grow.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about changing how you think about it. Not as a battle to be won, but as a way to work together to find the best way forward.
Okay, that sounds good in theory, but how do we actually do it? What are some practical things new managers can do to manage conflict using this frenetic approach?
Well, first things first, gotta listen. And I mean, really listen, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
You're talking about active listening again, right?
Yeah.
Being present in the moment, paying attention to what they're saying and how they're saying it, really trying to get where they're coming from.
Exactly. This can be tough, especially when emotions are running high. But it's so important to create that space where people feel safe to share their disagreements without feeling judged or like there will be negative consequences.
Creating that psychological safety where they can speak their mind without fear.
You got it. And once you've got that, focus on figuring out the root of the conflict. What's really going on here?
Because there's always a reason people disagree, right?
Yeah.
Could be different values, a misunderstanding about who's supposed to do what, or maybe just personality clashes.
Exactly. Until you understand why they're disagreeing, it's hard to find a solution that actually fixes the underlying problems. So how do you get to the bottom of it? Formal mediation, informal chats. What works best?
It depends, doesn't it, on what the conflict is about and who's involved. Sometimes just grabbing coffee and talking it out is enough to clear things up.
True. Often, just letting people share their perspectives and feel heard, that can really de-escalate the situation.
But sometimes you need a more structured approach.
Absolutely. If it's a really complicated issue or it involves sensitive topics, then having a facilitated conversation might be better. Setting some ground rules and having a neutral person there to guide the conversation can help a lot.
So choosing the right approach for this specific situation, knowing there's no magic formula.
That's phronesis in action, using your best judgment based on your experience to figure out what will probably lead to the best outcome.
Okay, so you've listened to both sides, you know why they're clashing, what's next?
Now you focus on solutions that work for everyone, and that takes creativity, collaboration, and a willingness to compromise.
Trying to find that win-win scenario where everyone feels like their needs are being met, at least to some extent.
Exactly. And here's where phronesis is really powerful. It helps you see that the best solutions often come from considering what everyone needs and thinks.
So not dictating a solution, but working together to find a path forward that feels fair to all sides.
Precisely. Might involve brainstorming, thinking outside the box for compromises, even getting advice from someone neutral.
Sounds like you're encouraging flexibility and adaptability, knowing there's not always one right answer when you're trying to resolve conflict.
That's a great observation. Phronesis is all about responding to the specific situation, understanding the people involved, and what you're ultimately trying to achieve.
Okay, we've talked about listening, figuring out the root cause, and finding solutions that work for everyone. Any other tips for managing conflict with this frenetic approach?
One last thing, document everything. Write it down.
Might seem a bit formal, but it can be super helpful, especially if the conflict is complicated or sensitive.
Exactly. Having a record of what happened, what everyone thought, the solution you all agreed on, and what steps you'll take next helps to prevent misunderstandings and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Creates accountability too, right?
Hmm.
Helps you track if things are actually getting resolved.
Absolutely. It's also good to go back and look at that documentation later on just to make sure the solution is still working and everyone's doing what they said they would.
So we've covered a lot about managing conflict today. But how does all of this tie back to this idea of phronesis?
Great question. And the connection is pretty clear. Phronesis is all about making smart decisions in tough situations when things aren't clear-cut. And conflict, it's definitely one of those situations.
Because there's no one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with conflict. Every situation is different. You got to carefully consider what's going on, the people involved, and what might happen if you choose one action over another.
Exactly. That's where phronesis shines. Using your judgment to pick the path that's most likely to end well and in a way that's fair.
So it's about balancing being assertive with being empathetic, wanting to find a solution, but also needing to fix the underlying problems, and aiming for a win-win, but also being realistic about the need for compromise sometimes.
You got it. That kind of nuanced decision-making, that's the heart of phronesis. It's about using your wisdom and experience to handle tricky situations and find solutions that are both effective and ethical. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute. Let's talk about something else new managers often struggle with: imposter syndrome.
Ah, yes, that feeling that you're not good enough for the job,
Yeah.
that you're just pretending until you figure it out, and that any minute now everyone's going to realize you're a fraud.
Exactly. That feeling of not being good enough even when you are, it's so common, especially for new managers.
It can be paralyzing. You start doubting every decision, avoiding risks, and just generally feeling like you're in over your head.
And that's where phronesis can help. Because even the most experienced leaders have moments of self-doubt. Everyone does.
So it's not about getting rid of self-doubt completely, but learning to manage it so it doesn't stop you from doing your job.
Exactly. One of the best ways to deal with imposter syndrome is to change your perspective. Instead of focusing on what you think you're bad at, focus on your strengths, what you've accomplished, and your potential to keep getting better.
So it's okay to not be perfect, to still be learning.
Totally. It's about having a growth mindset, seeing challenges as chances to learn, always looking for new knowledge and experiences to help you grow.
This ties back to what we said earlier, right? About phronesis being like a muscle that gets stronger over time. The more you face challenges and learn from them, the better you get at this whole leadership thing.
I love how you're connecting these ideas. Phronesis isn't about knowing it all. It's about developing the ability to handle complex situations, make good decisions even when things are uncertain, and learn from every experience.
And that kind of mindset can make a huge difference when you're fighting that imposter syndrome. Instead of seeing every challenge as a sign you're not good enough, you see it as a chance to improve, to get better at using phronesis.
Exactly. It's about shifting your focus from proving yourself to improving yourself.
Which honestly sounds a lot healthier and more rewarding in the long run.
Absolutely. It's a much better way to lead. Okay, let's talk about another important skill for new managers: delegation.
Delegation. Ugh, that one can be tough to master, especially when you're new and still trying to find your feet.
I hear you. Delegation often feels risky, especially when you're used to doing everything yourself and you're not sure if other people can handle it.
Plus, there's that fear, right, of people thinking you're lazy or incompetent if you're not the one doing all the work.
Right. But here's the key. Delegating effectively isn't about avoiding responsibility, it's about empowering your team, using their strengths, and giving yourself time to focus on the bigger picture stuff.
So it's about realizing you can't do it all alone, and the best way to achieve big things is to have a team that can share the workload and contribute their own unique skills.
Exactly. And this takes trust, clear communication, and letting go of some control.
That letting go part, that's a hard one for new managers,
Yeah.
especially if you're used to being the one who gets things done.
It is. But here's where phronesis helps. It helps you see that delegating isn't about giving up control altogether. It's about sharing it in a way that benefits everyone, both the individual and the team.
Finding that sweet spot, giving them guidance and support, but also giving them the freedom to make decisions and take ownership of their work.
You got it. And that takes really understanding your team's strengths and weaknesses, being able to communicate clearly, setting clear expectations, and giving good feedback.
So it's not just dumping tasks on people, it's about being thoughtful, picking the right tasks for the right people, and giving them the support they need to be successful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where that idea of phronesis as a muscle comes in again. The more you practice delegating, the better you get at figuring out people's abilities, giving clear instructions, and resisting the urge to micromanage.
And the better you delegate, the more your team grows, which helps everyone in the end.
Absolutely. It's a win-win cycle. Now let's shift gears and talk about something else crucial for new managers: feedback.
Oh yeah, feedback. That can be a tricky one, especially when you're new to management and you're still trying to establish yourself as a leader.
It's true. Giving good feedback takes a mix of being sensitive, being direct, and genuinely wanting to help the person get better.
And receiving feedback, that can be tough too, especially if you're struggling with imposter syndrome and already feeling unsure of yourself.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Feedback is how we grow and get better. Being able to give and receive it well, that's crucial for any leader.
So how can phronesis help us approach feedback in a way that's actually helpful and makes people want to improve?
One of the most important things with frenetic feedback is to focus on the behavior, not the person.
So instead of saying you're being so negative, you'd say something like, I notice you've made a lot of critical comments in this meeting. Is there something specific that's bothering you?
Exactly. Address the specific action, not their personality.
That's much less personal and confrontational. People are more likely to listen and take it well when you do that.
For sure. Another key thing is to give feedback in a timely manner and be specific. Don't wait for a performance review to bring things up.
So deal with things as they happen while it's still fresh in everyone's mind.
Right. And when you're saying good job, don't just leave it at that. Explain what you liked about their work and why it was effective.
And if you're giving constructive criticism, focus on one or two specific things they can improve rather than giving them this huge list of things to fix.
You got it. Keep it manageable and give them concrete actions they can take. Also, keep the feedback focused on the future, not the past.
So don't dwell on mistakes. Help them learn and move forward.
Exactly. It takes empathy and a real desire to see them succeed.
Okay, focusing on behavior, being timely and specific, and focusing on the future. Any other tips for giving feedback the frenetic way?
One last thing. Be open to getting feedback yourself.
Because as leaders, we never stop learning, and we need to know how our actions affect others.
Absolutely. This can be tough, especially if you're battling that imposter syndrome and feeling insecure.
But being able to accept feedback gracefully, that shows strength, not weakness.
You got it. It shows you're humble, you want to learn, and you value what other people think.
Exactly. And when you're open to feedback, you create this culture where everyone is constantly learning and getting better.
And that kind of culture, that's what makes teams really thrive and achieve great things. It's like we're talking about a whole new way to think about leadership, right? More collaborative, more focused on the people, and really emphasizing this idea of constantly learning and growing, both for the leader and the team.
You nailed it. It's about moving away from that old school top-down style where the manager is supposed to have all the answers. Phronesis is different. It's about sharing leadership, everyone contributing and learning from each other.
And for those new managers who are like, whoa, I went from doing my own work to leading a team, how do I handle this? This approach seems perfect.
It is. Phronesis isn't about having all the answers right away. It's about learning how to deal with complex situations, making good calls when things are uncertain, and learning from every single experience. So instead of freaking out because you don't know everything, you just accept that you're on a journey, right? You're going to keep learning and becoming a better leader over time.
That's the mindset. And honestly, that journey is way more fulfilling, both for you and your career, when you approach it with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to learn from the people around you.
This has been eye-opening. We've only scratched the surface of phronesis, but I already see how it can apply to so many different parts of being a leader.
It's a really powerful concept and so relevant today, especially with how complex and fast-changing the world is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, one last question for you. For those listening who are new to management, or even those who've been doing it for a while, what's one thing they can take away from this and start using today to become more frenetic leaders?
Great question. Here's a thing to remember. Phronesis isn't something you achieve overnight. It takes time. It's a commitment to always be learning and growing.
It's about being present, thinking about how your actions affect others, and always looking for new knowledge and experiences to help you become a wiser, more effective leader.
Well said. So, for those of you who are ready to start this journey of frenetic leadership, remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Start small.
What's one small step you can take today to bring more awareness, empathy, and practical wisdom to how you interact with your team?
Maybe it's having a deeper conversation with someone on your team, asking for feedback on how you communicate, or even just taking some time to think about your own strengths and weaknesses as a leader.
Every journey starts with a single step, and the path to becoming a frenetic leader is no different.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into practical wisdom for new managers.
We hope you've learned some valuable things that you can use on your own leadership journey.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading with wisdom and compassion.